Great.
Mhm.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I want to welcome everyone to the 2025 Beyond Basics Literacy Summit. Before we begin, please note that today's summit will be recorded, so we want all of you to know that. My name is Carolyn Clifford. I'm an anchor and reporter for Channel 7 WXYZ TV in the Detroit area. I'm a passionate believer in Beyond Basics, so I'm so happy to be here for this literacy summit today. Uh, we're going to shine the light on the most urgent challenges facing our country, and that, of course, is the literacy crisis. So I want to thank you all for giving your time this afternoon and being here with us. Whether you're an educator, a community leader, an advocate, or a policymaker, your presence today speaks to your commitment to making sure that every child in America has the opportunity to read and succeed, which is so very important. Today's panel will highlight innovative ideas, lived experiences, and collaborative solutions that can help move us forward. So I'm so thrilled to introduce to you our panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge, insight, and heart to this very conversation today. I want to start with Caitlin Buss. She is an assistant editorial page editor and a columnist with the Detroit News. Caitlin manages the editorial section and writes on local, state, and national issues. She's a frequent commentator on WJR Radio and Flashpoint Detroit. She rejoined the paper in 2022, but also served as an editorial writer, opinion editor, and columnist there from 2014 to 2018. In between her time at the news, Caitlin was vice president of public affairs at DC-based TDS Public Affairs. I can go on and on, but I'm going to leave it there. Pamela Good is the co-founder and CEO of Beyond Basics, a nonprofit organization that provides highly effective literacy interventions to students in metropolitan Detroit. Over 20 years ago, Pamela started delivering coats to struggling inner city schools in Detroit, but soon realized that the children needed much more than just coats. This realization led her to co-found Beyond Basics, which offers intensive one-on-one reading, tutoring, and literacy enrichment programs for kids K through 12. Mike Jandernoa was president, CEO of the Perigo Company from 1983 to 2000, chairman of the board from 1991 to 2003, and continued to serve on the board of directors until 2017. Perigo is a leading global healthcare supplier that develops, manufactures, and distributes over-the-counter and generic prescription pharmaceuticals. Mike is a graduate of the University of Michigan, go blue, although I say go green, and has founded or co-founded many organizations, including Jandernoa Entrepreneurial Mentoring, Bridge Street Capital Partners, Grand Angels, and 42 North Partners. And again, I can go on and on about Mike, but I'm going to leave it there. Curtis E. Blackwell II is the president and co-founder of the Sound Mind, Sound Body Foundation, a Detroit nonprofit dedicated to youth development through athletics, academics, and life skills. A Detroit native and Martin Luther King High School alumnus, Blackwell holds degrees from Hampton University and Baylor University. His leadership has helped Sound Mind, Sound Body impact over 30,000 students globally, with more than 5,000 earning college scholarships. Khalil Assad owns and operates an HVAC company that provides commercial and residential services. Additionally, he has a nonprofit organization that trains inner city individuals in vocational skills through retired sheet metal technicians. Both companies aim to assist income qualified individuals in making home upgrades for safety and energy efficiency. Personally, Khalil mentors some of his employees, offering technical training and life skills support. So again, thank you to all of our panelists today. Hopefully, we're going to have a lively discussion about literacy. As we begin our conversation, please feel free to drop any questions into the chat box. We will address your questions at the end, but let's get started with our discussion. You know, literacy is the foundation of education and key to unlocking opportunities for individuals and communities. Yet millions of Americans struggle with basic reading and writing skills, which affects not just their personal success, but also the health and strength of our nation. Literacy is not just about reading and writing, it is the gateway to education, stable employment, and economic mobility. It affects not only our local communities, but our nation as a whole, and that is the absolute truth. You know, there's a lot of people discussing this literacy epidemic nationally. So I want to say this. A Nation at Risk was a landmark 1983 report by the U.S. Department of Education that warned of a rising tide of mediocrity in American schools and called for urgent education reform, including higher standards, stronger curricula, and improved teacher preparation. So let's start our discussion off with you, Pam, and then anyone else can chime in if you like. Hard to believe that more than 40 years ago, and we're still seeing widespread reading struggles among students. We see it in our test scores. So, in light of today's literacy rates, Pam, do you believe the warnings from A Nation at Risk were adequately addressed, or are we still facing the same educational crisis today in 2025?
Well, it's a clear no that they were not addressed. Those are early warnings, but we've had warnings throughout the years that have been warnings. And, from my perspective, I think the magnitude of the problem keeps people from looking for a solution. And, this has to do with our children and the rest of their lives. I mean, if we don't get them reading, we're really killing the futures of our children. And so I do think that the need should set the goal. And I'm hopeful in this hour. It seems like the states are starting to look at the issue. We have some 40 states that are adopting a phonics-based curriculum. So for the first time, really, I see some strategic addressing and investment in that. And I do hope it continues.
Anybody else want to chime in before I move on to my next question?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, through COVID, it's actually gotten worse. And that's why, to me, Beyond Basics is so critically important. It was important before COVID. It's significantly more important since COVID, and especially for those kids between fourth grade and 12th grade, because they've got a program that's unquestionably the best for those students who are behind in their reading that are past the third grade. And because of the COVID impact on so many students, the need is greater than ever today for Beyond Basics. So timing is essential for those students before they move on.
I agree. And I just want to quickly add, so many principals have sung the praises of Beyond Basics, saying they had kids who were, troublemakers in their schools. But when Beyond Basics came in, those kids became model students. So we can't say enough about Beyond Basics. My next question is for Caitlin. Caitlin, what kinds of stories or reporting approaches have you seen actually spark action with this topic, whether from parents, educators, or policymakers? And how can we replicate that success around literacy?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I think, you end up getting the most coverage when the data is the worst, right? And so I think we're really reaching a moment. Before I go into, I actually have, I think, three strategies that I have seen work, but I just want to go with the 30,000 foot view. COVID brought a ton of learning loss, a ton of setbacks, but I think it also brought about this almost revolution in education that we're seeing right now. It really took the mask off, no pun intended. Parents were allowed to see, what has been going on in classrooms for decades. And that's not to say that there hasn't been great work going on, but that battle has been going on. And so now you have a much greater awareness of that. Online learning really, exposed the literacy crisis, among other things. When you're trying to get coverage of this issue, like I said, I think the bad data really draws eyes. And so in Michigan, I'm very proud of our paper. We have a dedicated education reporter, and she tries to cover, the state level results anytime they come out. But as they get worse and worse, which we're seeing now, 44th for fourth grade reading last year, 33rd for eighth grade reading, those are pretty jarring numbers. And so the reporting on that follows the bad data. It can also follow no data. We've seen recently, Michigan doesn't keep track of how many kids are in a class, and there's no state data on that. That's drawn a lot of attention. The more attention you get to it, the more movement you get from policymakers and lawmakers. I think another important thing is who is talking about these issues. So it's great to have Pam and all of you out there talking about it. When, perhaps if we write an editorial about it, that draws attention because we're one of those stakeholders that people listen to, whether or not they should. A recent example of this was in the San Francisco Chronicle. I think it was last week. And, most papers are not really ideologically right-leaning necessarily. But they came out really hard against the California Assembly for not taking literacy legislation seriously, not passing it, not giving kids that opportunity. And so when you have something like an editorial board that, might take a different position chiming in on that, it can be really influential. Same thing with other stakeholders talking about this issue.
Got
The
it.
third thing, I have one more. I think when you have individual success stories can really draw attention. So whether that's one school district, whether that's one school that has succeeded, whether it's one child whose life has been made drastically better through something like Beyond Basics, that storytelling can really move the needle on some of these issues too.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin, for your insight there. Literacy lawsuits have increasingly drawn national attention to this systemic failures in how reading is taught here in America. One of the first to make headlines was the Detroit literacy lawsuit. That was filed back in 2016 by a group of students who argued that the state had denied them access to a basic education by failing to provide necessary resources to learn to read. The case resulted in a landmark 2020 settlement recognizing access to literacy as a right. Still, though, nearly a decade later, a new lawsuit that we've all been hearing about in Massachusetts is making waves because two mothers are suing Lucy Calkins, Irene Fontes, Gay Sue Pinnell, and Heinerman Publishing, accusing them of promoting an ineffective curriculum that has left their children unable to read. And while Massachusetts ranks #1 in education nationally, the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress shows that 71% of the state's eighth graders are reading below proficiency. These lawsuits are certainly shining a spotlight on this crisis that continues to go unaddressed. So this question here is for all panelists. So whoever wants to chime in. How do you think the growing awareness of literacy-related lawsuits like the one in Massachusetts is impacting the public's understanding of this literacy crisis, and is it making a difference?
I'll say that as a parent, prior to having my son in Beyond Basics, I wasn't aware of the extra options. I thought that the school district was doing everything, my son was doing his best, and that was it. My son just wasn't a good reader. I think that lawsuits like this bring awareness. There are other options. There are other channels such as Beyond Basics to help our children and bring them up to speed as far as reading goes. Because honestly, without Beyond Basics, I would have just accepted that was my son's level. That's as far as he could go, and I didn't know. I didn't know better. I thought the school district was doing everything they could, but thankfully for Beyond Basics, he has improved drastically.
I think, and to follow up on what Khalil said, Carolyn, I think the lawsuit has done an excellent job of raising awareness of, in terms of that this is a community issue. We all are impacted by this gravely. And I know we're talking about the problem, but the solution is that we all have to hold each other accountable for uplifting our young people, whether it's our school board members, our teachers, everyone within the community. And so the lawsuit is letting us know that, hey, it's a lot of things that we think are taking place that are not, and we need to all wake up and pay more attention and hold each other accountable so that we can ensure our young people are educated in the area of literacy.
I agree. I know when I first came in contact with Pam and she had put together a documentary on a young man in Detroit who made it all the way to his senior year in high school and could not read and would actually get lost on the streets of Detroit because he couldn't read the street signs. And as a senior, a big young football player learned how to read and was actually crying because Beyond Basics changed his life. And I know he's a business owner today and married with children, but that's the impact of Beyond Basics. But schools should be held accountable when a kid makes it all the way to their senior year in high school and can't read. How did they fall through the cracks?
Yes.
So
I agree. If I could comment, I'll comment on the lawsuits. I think that unfortunately, it's been a necessary evil in a way because it's a lawsuit. And when they get the funding, there's no guarantee that the people who won will actually learn to read. I mean, each of those kids in Detroit were awarded $40,000 with no guarantee that it was actually going to solve the problem. And yet at the same time, it is what's bringing awareness. So at some point, what will it take for us at society to have it on our radar long enough that we can move the needle forward and actually embrace something that's going to work and change things? And so I'm hopeful, and this is the most conversation since COVID, to Mike's point, that we have seen around literacy. And if we can keep moving forward with this, I think that we can actually get people to, agree to roll out a solution. And it has to be measured. It has to be a solution, not just the image of a solution, but substance.
Yeah, very, very true. Caitlin, before I let you go, and I know you spoke a little bit about your coverage, but why do you think the literacy crisis hasn't received more consistent national coverage? And what responsibility do you think we have, our media outlets, in amplifying this issue? Should we do more?
Yeah, I think we're kind of in a perfect storm for the literacy crisis to have been viewed as such, and we're finally at that point where I think the data, and particularly in Michigan, was trending down, with little bumps here and there. And then we had the COVID blip and people, chalked it up to that. And now that we're seeing scores that were worse than before COVID, now you're really reaching a crisis point. And so there's plenty of more reporters, there's plenty more editors out there willing to cover this. I think there is a responsibility on the media to cover this. And again, I said, we have dedicated reporters to this, but certainly we're seeing the effect of it culturally. And I think it's bubbling over. It's that tipping point moment where now you have parents who are speaking out and forming coalitions. You have a little less tribalism on this issue because everyone agrees that it is not right, that there is something that has to be done. I think, in terms of policy making, like Pam said, there's some good progress being made on that. I think the best thing to keep media coverage of this is really kind of organic frustration with it. And parents can have a huge, huge role in that. Certainly the media is willing to listen to any school administrators, any teachers with real experience that want to talk about what's really going on. Sometimes it can be hard to get into the schools and get data or get feedback on this. And there are good reasons that, teachers don't want to talk about it, that administrators don't want to talk about it. There's a lot of politics and power that falls behind that. But I really think in this moment, literacy has become such a crisis, both because of the schools, because of cell phones and attention problems and all of that. And the biggest power will come from groups of people, coming together to advocate for this from various directions. And the media won't be able to ignore that.
Got it. Well, literacy impacts nearly every aspect of society. We all know that, reaching far beyond the classroom, which is what we're talking about. In athletics, it determines whether student athlete can stay eligible and even access scholarship opportunities. In the workforce, strong reading skills are essential for job readiness, career advancement, and adapting to an increasingly knowledge-based economy. It also affects families and communities. So this question is for Mike. Mike, how do you see this affecting our nation's workforce in the future, especially as many careers now require college degrees or specialized training?
Well, it's unbelievable the difference. It's been a while since I had a day job as a CEO, but for 22 years having that responsibility, I used to be able to hire a high school student and know that they could read and do basic math 90% of the time. Now, my successor at Perigo, got up to 14,000 employees around the country and around the world. And Michigan has the worst reading performance of any state now that we operate in. We got 40 plants around the country and around the world. We used to be the best. We've gone from the best to the worst that we operate in. And so it's already affecting us today from a job standpoint, the entry level. And you say the college preparedness is a huge gap with remedial work required for all community colleges. It's just unacceptable. And if there's any state that needs to address the reading problem now, it's Michigan, because we had 1 million people leave the state, 1,000,001 between 2000 and 2009. They were younger people. They took their kids with us. So we have more baby boomers and fewer students, a bigger gap between those two than any other state. There's no way we can fill that gap unless we have a tremendous change in the impact of our K-12 system. We need that now because these baby boomers want to retire and we don't have students. If every student could read and prepared for college, that wouldn't be enough. So we have a crisis that needs attention now. And that's why Beyond Basics is so important because so many kids were negatively impacted by COVID and they need help when they're in 4th through 12th grade. And there is not another program that's anywhere near as effective as Beyond Basic and helping those kids learn to read and then have a life and a career and be contributing members to society.
Absolutely. And you can't bring businesses in if you don't have a workforce. Curtis, let me ask you this. Although literacy and athletics are often thought of separately, how can illiteracy limit a student athlete's chances of succeeding in sports or even obtaining scholarships?
One of the biggest things that we face is that our young people have to be ready for college. And so many times we overemphasize the athletic portion and don't pay attention to the academic portion. And so, what Beyond Basics has done a great job of is really providing assessments to student athletes within the Sound Mind, Sound Body program. And what we've learned from the assessments that Beyond Basics provides, it creates a sense of urgency and awareness about the gap that is around where you are and where you need to be, and then you got to look at where you're headed. So if you're in the 11th grade and you're reading at the 5th grade level, but you have 20 scholarship offers and you're saying you're getting ready to go to a college, that's a big gap that we have to fill. Jalen Reed from Detroit Martin Luther King was just drafted last week in the 6th round. He was a Beyond Basics participant in the Sound Mind, Sound Body program. And he was a very good student academically, but he did not realize that on the literacy level, he was 3 or 4 grade levels behind. And so the opportunity to collaborate with Beyond Basics, Martin Luther King, and the district and Sound Mind, Sound Body provided opportunity for him to make up 2 grade levels within one summer. And so that's the gap that we have to close because it's not just about our kids earning scholarships and getting to college. It's about getting to college and staying at college. We had a young man that just recently died 2 days ago. He was shot and killed. But it's about him not succeeding when he got to school and being back at home. And then now he became a victim of senseless gun violence. So we have to have our kids prepare for college or else they won't be able to fulfill that scholarship that they earned.
Yeah, because there are even pro athletes who can't read. And I know I read about one hiding in his hotel room trying to read, children's books because he was too embarrassed to say that he couldn't read. Mike, let me ask you this. What role can businesses play in supporting student athletes by promoting literacy initiatives that help students balance academics and athletics?
Well, we've got to work and make sure our employees are well aware of the importance of the academics along with the athletics because there's many parents that maybe focus more on the athletics and don't focus enough on the academics. And we need to help from a business standpoint, all employees at all levels understand the importance and the responsibility of the parents to make sure that they were holding the school systems accountable to help their son or daughter learn to read and perform academically. Other areas we need to help in the business community standpoint is in absenteeism. We have a crisis in absenteeism. It was not good in the state of Michigan before COVID, and now it's gotten a lot worse. And still in the Detroit Public Schools last year, 51% of the students in the Detroit Public Schools were chronically absent. Statewide, it's over the low 30s are chronically absent. You can't blame the teacher for not teaching if the kids are not showing up. But I think that one of the reasons that kids don't show up is that how fun would school be if you were going to class and you couldn't read, you couldn't do your homework, you couldn't pass your tests, you'd be pretty frustrated. And so we have done, in my opinion, a huge disservice to those kids and not enabling them to read by the time they're in 4th grade so they could read to learn afterwards. and pass tests and perform well. So we need to turn this around, and we need to turn it around now. We owe them a chance.
You're so right about that. Khalil, let me ask you this. Parents often struggle with how to best support their children's literacy development. What advice would you give to other parents seeking help for their children and for them to improve their reading skills, especially if they're facing challenges in the classroom? Because I know you said you're in a great school district and your child benefited from Beyond Basics, right?
Right. So I'm in the Birmingham School District with three children. Two were naturally great readers, and the third just wasn't. He needed a different type of learning style, a different approach. I would say, don't blame your child, don't blame you, don't accept that's all they can do. There is room for improvement. There are different styles, such as Beyond Basics, to show them to teach them how to read with a different approach. Take a different approach to it. Um, every child learns differently. I would say also don't rely on just the school district. That was something that we did for years. That we were relying on, well, he's doing the after school intervention, he's doing the in-school intervention, and he was progressing through the grades every year. COVID was a big impact. I would say don't rely on just the school district. Reach out, be your child's advocate. Find programs. If your school doesn't have Beyond Basics, reach out to Beyond Basics. Find these programs because we can't rely on just the school system. We have to address the root cause, and that's the reading.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some proven solutions. In the past year, awareness of the illiteracy epidemic has increased, with 40 states and DC passing legislation requiring evidence-based practices in the classroom. Pam, I'm going to turn to you for this. From your on-the-ground experience, what are the most effective interventions or models you've seen that are working to improve literacy?
Well, I think that we've kind of coined the term, but it's the gold star standard of reading proficiency is what really needs to be implemented. And although the schools are moving in the right direction, they're moving in the direction with the curriculum only. You hear a lot about the curriculum needing to be phonics and decoding and teaching kids the sounds of words. And that's good. But, to Curtis's point, without an assessment, you really need to know how far that child's behind. Otherwise, you tend to assume they are able to read much better than they are. So an assessment, and we have found that if a student is already past third grade and they don't know how to read, even by as much be a half grade level behind, they really need intensive one-on-one tutoring. And if a child's 3 grade levels behind and you move them 2 months, they're still crippled. And so getting a little bit of growth, I think sometimes the educators celebrate a little bit of growth, but it's so far from curing, the problem. And so I think everybody rolling out what we call the gold star standard to reading proficiency. I'd like to add one other thing about this because most of the time when we hear that the states are moving towards the curriculum now, that we just assume that it's any child who needs help. But educators are primarily focused on K-3. That's the way that education was set up. You learn to read by third grade, and you read by third grade. They don't, they're not letting you go on to fourth, fifth, and sixth without getting it addressed. So if they even solve the problem for K-3, which is what they're focused on, you would have 4th through 12th graders that are currently behind not getting help. And there are some districts doing a little bit more 4th grade, maybe 5th grade. But for the most part, nobody is talking about the middle high school kids. And that is what is going to help our workforce dramatically. And if I can just comment on the, economic piece with business, I do know that it's possible that any business who is recruiting people, they really should, they could call us, but get the students assessed and get the job applicant, assessed, and then get them tutored. They can be catching kids that have already aged out of K-12. We have virtual tutoring we could do that online. So there are solutions that people can take in their own hands. And so we just as a society need to talk about what works. It's a gold star standard and access points for assessment and for virtual tutors and really be able to do this work together, divide and conquer it.
Very, very important. Now, this question is for anyone on the panel. Educators, parents, and students are becoming more aware of the illiteracy epidemic. How can we as a community propose sparking a literacy movement, businesses, media, educators, and families all working together to ensure every child has equal access to literacy and educational opportunities? So how can we all do this together and make this effort work? Anybody can chime in.
I'd say that we could follow the Mississippi model. They went from 49th in reading. And if you take it based on the economic apples and apples basis, they've gone to #1 in 10 years by reading phonics, by providing help for dyslexia, and not having social promotions. So if you weren't reading at the end of 3rd grade, you did not get promoted. We've tried the 3rd grade reading law and we eliminated it here. But they've gone from 49 to 1 on that basis. So in Michigan, we have 444 different curriculums. Only 3 or 4 are strong phonics based in our 850 school districts. So we need to change to phonics. In West Michigan, we've worked with just now, this past year, 11 colleges and universities who have schools of education have switched to phonics. They all went away from phonics, depending on which school, whether it's Western or Grand Valley, 24 to 27 years ago. We went to this whole language, which that lawsuit you mentioned earlier about is about whole language. Most other states did the same thing, went away from phonics. All those schools, our 11 schools, have all committed to change, to go back to phonics. We work with the intermediate school districts here and with 5 of them. They think that less than 10% of the teachers are able to teach phonics. They think that letters training, which costs $1,500 and takes 18 months, is the best system to train teachers to teach phonics. But there's not a lot of money in the budget. So I think if the parents can speak up about are their schools using phonics and how can their teachers get trained in phonics? So, but we did pass some information and a program for dyslexia. It's going to take 2 years to implement, but that will help too. So there is some promise in some areas that schools are willing to commit to go to phonics, but like I said, only a handful of them are in phonics and doing a good job today. So we've got a lot of work to do to flip back to phonics. And we need to do it as soon as possible.
I didn't know that, and I didn't know that about Mississippi. Anybody else want to chime in?
Well,
I would say, oh, go ahead, Caitlin. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay. I think, ways to make reading fun, and that's not to say that you want to necessarily cater to the most attractive, flashy thing out there, because in some sense, that's what we're kind of trying to get away from. But, I'm a big fan of modeling what you want kids to do. And so, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm not always sitting down with a book in my own home, and I have 4 little kids, but I know it's probably the best thing I could be doing if I want them to be a great reader and really be interested in it. So whatever we can do in the classrooms, but certainly at home, and I know that's harder, but our school had a program, Drop Everything and Read in March, and I'm sure other schools have stuff like that. And the kids love it. I mean, they love just cuddling up with a book and understanding that I can drop everything and, I'm going to gain a lot out of this moment of reading, more than on my tablet, maybe at school, or maybe more than math class or whatever, and really strengthen that as a community and families. I think that would be, something we could do outside of legislation.
And my only thing I was going to say, because I think Mike and Caitlin have excellent points. The curriculum and those things are very phenomenal. We have to do exactly what we're doing right now today, but in each of our own individualized communities across the state of Michigan, getting stakeholders involved. We have a parent on a call. We have the curriculum providers like Beyond Basics. We have all of the people who care the most about those respective communities at the table. We need to do that in the UP, Western Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and we need to talk about what it is we can do to help elevate, because as a community, it won't change until we decide to make the change and we're aware of how we can all collaborate to make this work.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes before we take questions from people in our audience today. But if, and many of you have mentioned, like Pam just mentioned, Caitlin mentioned, Mike mentioned, if you could see one big change happen in the next year that would move the needle on literacy, what would it be and who needs to lead it? Curtis, I just heard you, but in 3 minutes, anybody want to chime in on that?
Oh,
I would say obviously the school systems need to do the phonics. But we, I think, need to encourage our friends, our family, our employees to read, especially to the younger kids, and to get them comfortable and interested in whatever genre they like and are interested in. I think Caitlin's point there of modeling that reading. But some kids are interested in reading about sports, some are interested in history, some are interested in, novels and the like. So find what your kids are interested in and encourage them to read. And when they're younger, read to them.
Yes.
And so the parents, we've got to help our own kids and make that something that's part of our daily lives.
I think
But
there's
I'd like to, oh, go ahead. Ooh.
just really quick. I think the schools are making a lot of progress on one thing that isn't even necessarily related to reading, but that is minimizing cell phone use in schools. And I don't have a ton of data to go on, but you can't help but imagine that's tied. And so in Michigan, that is coming, and so that's good.
Yeah, I was going to just add that each of us, we have a representative in Congress, and that we could reach out to their office and say that we're supportive of any and all literacy interventions, whether it's workforce for juveniles, whether it's K-12, but let them know that it's important and spread that word in your neighborhoods and your families, that because every state has this problem. So wherever you know people, have them just reach out. It's very easy to do, and it will really move the needle in that direction.
Absolutely. Well,
When they
thank
reach out, encourage them to support Beyond Basics financially. Really, I don't know another program that is so effective for those students. And like I say, our state needs it now, not next year, now.
I agree with you, Mike. Mike, Curtis, Caitlin, Pam, Khalil, thank you for, wow, an engaging discussion there. We're now going to transition to the questions and answers portion of our program. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat box right now. So let's dive into audience questions.
We have a few questions posed right now. First question, has COVID had an impact on students with dyslexia? And any solutions to help their literacy rates? This is a question for anybody.
I can tell you what we've seen, because we were obviously tracking this problem prior to COVID. And the majority of the problem was already there. But to Mike's point and others, it did get worse. We saw scores go from like 21% below proficiency in a district like Rochester Community Schools, up to 30. And so they definitely, it increased by a third, really. And so it is worse, but the core of this problem has been there for decades. And, we're just hopeful that it'll get addressed now. So I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but
Yeah, I would say that there was little done to address dyslexia during COVID. So anybody who had the dyslexia issue was not being helped. So that clearly, and depending on the experts, it's either 15% of the students or 20, something in there. Why argue about it? That's a huge portion of our student population has a dyslexia issue. And so I'm just so excited. It finally passed. It takes 2 years to put in place, but hopefully, as Pamela mentioned earlier, our teachers have not been trained to assess reading well. and they really were never trained at all to assess dyslexia. So we need to train them to understand and identify dyslexia, and then provide the appropriate support once they understand that they have it. So.
And I want to chime in on that. I think that's so very important. I know I brought two of my nieces to Beyond Basics because they both suffered with dyslexia, and they improved really quickly through the Beyond Basics program. But it's so hard to get kids the help they need to even get the screening at DPSCD for dyslexia so they can get the extra help in schools. It was a battle. I mean, I was on the phone with Dr. Vitti, who is the superintendent of DPSCD, and his wife, because they have kids who are dyslexic, and Dr. Vitti himself is dyslexic. But I'll say one thing, I have another niece who was dyslexic, and when she got the help she needed in the Detroit Public Schools, she excelled all the way. You know what I mean? Has a good job and is a mother today. So it's very important for us to assess kids and get them the help they need early so, they will do well in school. Another question, maybe?
Yes, we'll move on to the next question. Thank you all for your answers. Is there any correlation between adult literacy and their child's literacy rate? Perhaps this is a question for all of you, and perhaps Khalil as a parent.
I would say no. I don't see a correlation between the adults and the children. We're both educated. My wife's a doctor, and I would say that I don't see a correlation between the children because or all three of our children have the same environment, the same upbringing. We've read with all of them, as a child. So personally, I didn't see a correlation between our reading or our literacy and the child's literacy personally. So no, I would say I don't see it. I think it's really an individual issue. I would go back to saying that every child learns differently, and saying that my son in particular did not learn to read the same way that his siblings did.
I want to chime in on that. I think that's true for Khalil's family, but in Detroit Public Schools, there's even a foster program, Orchard's Children's Services. They have a reading program where they go into the homes, and a lot of the parents cannot read. And so they address it with the parents and with the children, because if your mom can't read, she can't read to a child. And that's a big problem in Detroit. And so, it's important to assess parents too, because the parents a lot of times don't want to admit that they, just like the grandmother I was telling you about, who I went to tutoring with Beyond Basics, and she was so embarrassed on the phone, and she was like, I can't let my grandchildren know that I can't read. She didn't want, to talk about getting tutoring. So we have to cut through and let adults know they don't have to be embarrassed, because you really can't help your children if you can't read. You won't be sitting at home reading to your children. You won't make them have a love for reading at home if you can't read, So to me, it's important in certain districts to address the parents as well and not make them feel embarrassed in any way.
Carol,
I think
you're
where
so
you
right
have,
with Carolyn, you're
sorry,
so right with your comments. And then the other group, that's a challenge for parents to read our English as a second language. And then in those homes, so those parents, very difficult for them to read because they can't read English. And so it makes it tough for them to help their students. So there's our circumstances at home where the home environment, and especially single parents, the amount of time to read to their kids when they're younger is more difficult. So those two issues of single parenting and English as a second language makes the home situation more complex and more difficult for those students.
Yeah, I chime in agreement with that, because you have both those families, whether it's English language learners or not being able to read yourself, they're not exposing kids to reading. They're not reading to them. They're not learning the sounds. And so you have more kids in vulnerable communities that don't really have a diagnosis of dyslexia. They just never really learned in the first place or were exposed to it in the first place. And it's the reason that you have The scores have improved in Detroit, but you still have in vulnerable communities about 85% of the kids that can't read. So you have a greater number. And I think it is because of those families that can't read and write English. And so, they're going to need more resources to do that. And I love that they're helping the parents read too. It's so wonderful to be able to do that, and the family learns together.
And just to piggyback off of it, I mean, there's so much at home, but the schools can be accountable too. And Michigan needs to get back to, not punishing, but holding schools accountable, because at least in Mississippi, like Mike mentioned, I think they're second for children in poverty now in terms of reading rates. I mean, they've really had massive improvement across the board, but particularly with vulnerable communities. And that's because the schools, are having to answer for some of that too. So I just wanted to add that.
And Caitlin, such a good point about the students with poverty. I don't know if everybody understands, but we went from a wealthy state 35 years ago to a poor state. 50% of the K-12 students are living in poverty today.
Yes,
50%. And
tragedy.
we are so far behind in funding those schools with its students of poverty. We started with an opportunity index finally, but it's only 20% funded. And those students need some additional resources to help, and they don't get it. Those schools are underfunded instead of overfunded or adequately funded. So that opportunity index is something really important for those economically disadvantaged students. And it's 50% of the students in our system today. Most people don't understand that. I don't know if everybody else understood that. That's how much we're a poverty state today. We didn't used to be, but we are today.
You're so right, Mike. If you get a chance to visit schools in the city of Detroit, I mean, that's why they put washing machines and dryers in schools, because if kids don't have clean clothes, they're not coming to school. If kids don't have food at home, they're not coming to school to learn how to read. And that's because of the poverty rate. I know in many districts, but especially in the city of Detroit.
Yes, I mean, we talk a lot about education because it's really that societal place where everybody shows up. But we have a broken social service system, and it's crushing so many people. I think that's where my efforts would be because my heart is more wrenched there. But the power of literacy for people in poverty is tremendous. And so as we address literacy first, it empowers people to be able to get on with their lives, because many are in poverty and they shouldn't be there. Others are in poverty, they shouldn't be there, but they have a reason that they're limited in some other way besides reading. And we need to be able to focus on them and then figure out how to connect the dots for them. But literacy is a huge, huge piece. And I do think somebody mentioned the school districts, right? If someone would mandate that in order to get academic dollars for a student, you had to guarantee literacy was addressed first, you would see an effort at the schools trying to do that, because the educational dollars that we have attached per a child are tremendous. They uphold the districts. And so there's a variety of little tweaks. And I was in front of someone, I said, we just need to tweak a few things. And if we put those tweaks in, you would start seeing a lot of different avenues blossom all at the same time. So.
I think we can move on to the next question. Thank you, everyone. So as we're talking about, solutions, this next question, is there a simple literacy goal expressed by a large number of individuals? For example, we commit to helping every child in X school district read at or above grade level by, let's say, 2027.
I don't think there's any goal set up. We have been meeting for the last 10 years, and we have got the first goal for reading literacy agreed to by the 5 intermediate school districts in West Michigan to improve the reading proficiency by 5% a year for the next 3 years. That's the first time there's been any goal set anywhere across school districts in West Michigan is that we've set a threshold of a minimum of 5% increase. But it's the first time. We've been trying for 10 years to set a goal. And I am elated that we finally have gotten to that point in time.
Mike, is that K3, K5, K12?
It's
What?
K3, by the time they're in fourth grade, when they enter fourth grade.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
But it took 10 years to get there. So
Yes, I
this
know,
is
I
the
know.
first.
It's been slow going, but we need, yeah, uh, so I'm happy for that, and we have some ways to go, but yeah.
But Pam, I know when I do stories with you about Beyond Basics, and we talk about the numbers, you talk about how districts would just, if they would just listen, we could tackle the illiteracy rate, in Michigan fairly quickly if we could get to every student with the one-on-one tutoring, every student who is struggling with reading and in need of that one-on-one tutoring, right?
Right, this is the magnitude of this problem is so great, and every child deserves to learn to read right away. And so we really have to look at this as a crisis in education. And just like when we have other crises, there are people that come in for a short period of time to help us, flatten the curve, right? And I believe that the stakeholders in education, they really need to solve the problem like Mike and them are working on in Western Michigan, K3. Fix it. Let's fill up the hole in the boat. And then we really need partners to come in those districts that are large and go in and tutor and flatten the curve. There's some small districts, they could just get some literacy coaches that are trained and assess and, do the right method. But we could also open up the after school hours by giving parents vouchers that they could get their child reading after school. And I know for us, our virtual program works very well, especially with 5th through 12th graders. So you're opening up the times, right? After school, summertime. And when they go back to school, it doesn't really matter where they learned, whether they were home learning or whether that was during the school day. So we need to triage the groups, triage who are the partners that are working on this. And we're hopeful to divide up the number of students in need according to their congressional districts, because I think we could really start, depending on the district, galvanizing a community and really flattening that curve if we work together. And we'll probably find some regions that'll embrace it and others that wait. But if we can get a couple to embrace it and really, be literate in 4 years or 5 years for the community, that'd be tremendous.
I think we have time for probably a couple more questions. I want to make sure we pose the questions that may have not been answered yet. So, how do we foster, or how can we foster partnerships between schools, nonprofits, and communities to improve literacy outcomes?
Well, I would say me as a partner of Beyond Basics, we've been able to succeed because of the school districts providing opportunities for groups to kind of collaborate. And I look at that as truly essential because a lot of times, organizations that provide mentorship or support and development are the go-between the school and the actual parent because they're like a trusted, caring individual for young people, and so collaborating will be essential to helping motivate those students to want to succeed. So sometimes the school district will have RFPs, or the state will have grants that they make available, and then when you get groups to come together, you can see how that success can kind of coincide with each other because Beyond Basics providing literacy and sound mind, or other groups providing mentorship works together in favor of the young person.
I want to say one thing about that. I think the beauty of Sound Mind, Sound Body, partnering with Beyond Basics, the reason it's so important is because when you think about schools like Country Day, for example, if you know anything about Country Day requires every single student in that school to be involved in some type of extracurricular activity. They have to be involved in a sport or archery or something because they want kids to be excited about coming to school and being a part of a community. With what Curtis is doing, you have these kids who really want to play football or really want to play basketball or girls who really want to cheerlead. But the linchpin is he is requiring them to study as well, to study for the SAT or the ACT, learn reading, and partnering with Pam and Beyond Basics so kids can get something else out of it. But they're coming for athletics, but then you can include the educational part. And that's why I think that partnership is so, so very important. Because for me, as a kid growing up in Detroit, I don't know that I would have continued going to school if I wasn't a cheerleader, if I wasn't attached to the track program, if I didn't have something to excite me to come into school and then learn as well.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
I just think there's programs that are meant to help students find activities after school. And if we could have those programs help get the feedback of where those students are and identifies those students who are behind in reading, and then provide Beyond Basics for those students in their after-school program. There's a built-in system, a built-in process that I think could be leveraged to help those students. And some of that may also exist during the summertime, that those boys and girls clubs or here in West Michigan, the YMCA's have those type of activities. Could be done after school or in the summer, but it needs to be very intentional, and there needs to be some kind of assessment or feedback from the school systems to help those organizations identify the students that need that support.
I just wanted to add one more thing is that if we know the majority of our students are behind, there is no way that we can really make up that gap unless we provide out of school time opportunities for our young people. Like it has to be some form of extracurricular. I know Pam and Beyond Basics have done a phenomenal job of working in the schools at Detroit Public Schools. But when you have so many students that are behind, you have to figure out a way to get after school programming, community-based programming, or summer learning opportunities, or else we'll never, bridge this gap.
And get them excited about it too.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you, everyone. I think this we'll just wrap up to closing thoughts. Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. I want to thank all of our panelists today for your insightful contributions and for taking the time again to participate in today's important conversation. Your perspectives have helped shine a light on this critical issue of literacy and its far-reaching impact on our communities, our economy, and of course, our future. Some key takeaways from today's discussion include the critical need for evidence-based literacy instruction, the importance of community involvement in supporting literacy, like Curtis was just talking about, and the undeniable impact that reading proficiency has on workforce development and economic growth here in Michigan. Once again, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended and engaged with us. Thank you for your questions. A recording of this summit will be shared with all registered attendees so you can revisit the valuable insights discussed here today. We hope you will take all of these lessons learned today and continue advocating for literacy in your own circles. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Yes. May I just say one thing? I can't let this go by, but we have the esteemed John Corcoran who has joined us today, and he has lived this his entire life, and he's fought the battle of literacy for probably 50 years. I could be wrong on that, John, the time frame, but he's written a book called The Teacher Who Couldn't Read, and he became a teacher and he couldn't read, and his story is phenomenal. He's written other books. He's been fighting this good fight before I knew it was even a fight to fight. And so thank you for being with us today. Thank you for all that